Tony Taters, Anthony Santander has reached an agreement with the Toronto Blue Jays. 5-year, $90 million is the report at the moment. And I think he has the option to possibly, there's incentives to have that be higher. And I know this stings for Orioles fans because you're like, damn, I love Tony. I don't want to see him in another uni. Clearly, to me, this was the biggest offer he definitely received. I want to hear if anyone comes out to say it, but he's getting at least 90 mil. And Teoscar Hernandez, granted, was a 3-year deal. I thought that Tony was going to have to settle for a 3-year deal, but clearly he got the security with the 5, and he got the security with at least 90 million going in the bag. But 18 million a year, that ain't a bad thing for a guy that's coming off hitting roughly 40 jacks and 100 plus ribbies, right, guys? So it's but yeah, is the 5-year deal going to be worth it? That's going to be the question.
That's going to be the big question. I don't know if it's a. Here's what I'll say: the dollar amount's good for the Blue Jays. The contract length is good for Tony Taters. Yeah. I think that Anthony Santander is probably worth a 9-figure number. I was thinking more along the lines of like low 100s, maybe 120, probably what he would go for. But hey, the Blue Jays kind of got him at a discount, I think, from a dollar standpoint. The length doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And a lot of people, especially Orioles fans, will be wondering why the Orioles couldn't spend that kind of money. And the thing of it is that they could have, but if that's what Tony was asking for was a 5-year plus deal, there's no way the Orioles could have or should have done that. Not to mention that Santander has hit a lot of jacks, but his batting average hasn't been what it should be. And so I think that's one of the other big reasons that there's risk involved with Anthony Santander, because he can go on some crazy streaks. And so, that's why they moved on from him. And now they get a compensatory pick. So it's not all bad.
No, it's not all bad. I think that this was the hometown guy that people loved, and he's been the best hitter as far as production-wise and home runs, the extra base hits and RBIs the last 3 seasons. That's been Tony for the Orioles, but the 5-year deal. And right now, and I love Tony, he'll be 31 this year or next October or this October technically. So 5-year deal, he's pushing to 35, 36. Are you expecting him to be that player for 5 years, or are you going to be happy with 3? I think the bigger part here is I'm still trying to figure out Toronto. I appreciate that they're in on guys, but there's still a lot of question marks around the Toronto Blue Jays. They're trying to keep up in the American League East that the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Orioles, and then Tampa's track record of just being there. Toronto has become the kind of, I don't want to say the most disappointing, but the most, with the team with the least expectations now in that division. So, yeah, I hope the best for Tony. I'm sure it was hard for him to go, but Kev, I think if you're Baltimore here and this is the conversation, if that's what it was going to take for Tony to stay, I think you got to see what other options, and it just further validates saying everyone's healthy. You got to figure out, is there an outfielder in your organization that can be it? And if not, you can start planning accordingly for future years.
Yeah, and it's not even about, looking to see if you have other options. The Orioles do have other options, and I think that obviously plays a big part here. And I agree with Brad where 18 million, I think, is a pretty good number for Toronto, but obviously the length of that deal is going to make it pretty interesting. And for Baltimore, it wouldn't have made sense to bring Tony back at that length. It just wouldn't have, because Heston, you can't block him anymore. Obviously, he's going to benefit from Tony being gone in terms of his role. And the hope is that he can turn into that consistent power hitter with every day or close to it playing time, depending on what happens and what roles these outfielders have, and if the Orioles want to platoon anybody with anybody else. And to me, I feel like that's the route that this team is going, where they want to not go all in on the young core, but they're going in on it, because we can be honest about it. We've all talked about it. the Orioles this season is going to live and die by that young core. It's going to live and die by, can Jackson Holiday take the next step? It's going to live by, can Adley Rutschman shake that second half slump and get back to the Adley that we know here in Baltimore? If Gunnar can continue doing those Gunnar Henderson things, if Brayson Rodriguez can stay healthy and be that number one stud ace, this is what it's going to take for this Orioles team to be competitive. The veteran moves, I know for a lot of people, losing Corbin and losing Tony, that those are tough blows, and that definitely hurts. I'm not trying to diminish the fact that the Orioles lost one of the best pitchers in baseball and arguably their biggest clubhouse guy, their biggest vet leader. It's going to take some time to work through that stuff. But the Orioles weren't going to go anywhere anyway if the young core doesn't progress like they need it to. And you can talk about moving off of guys of veteran talent or trading some of that young core. They've done some of that already. They tried it and they've moved pieces. They've tried. And I feel like, to me, if the young core doesn't produce the way that we're expecting it to, the season was a wash either way.
Yeah. I mean, these are the tough decisions you have to make. And I know people are going, well, hey, I'd love to see something. And especially with a guy that you feel wanted to reward, but keep this in mind. The time to extend Tony was before 2024 season. If you really were like, hey, we want to get this done, but as soon as the season happened, one, you don't really want to negotiate with guys during the season, because then a lot of guys talk about the mental side with Q. Start doing a little bit more when you play and thinking too much, put pressure on yourselves. And I know a lot of players around baseball that when they get to that point, it messes with their head. So once the season started and Tony started doing what he was doing, yeah, he knew that his price then shot up. So you had to make a decision. Orioles knew that, hey, we're not going to be willing to pay that price. We appreciate you. We'll spend a little bit less, which they did on Tyler O'Neill, see if that fits. And we'll also see if a guy like Heston Kjerstad or whoever else we have can be that answer. And then you keep moving forward. But for Toronto, you get a guy that the last 3 years has been consistent, but going to a new environment, new place, can you continue to see that success offensively as far as those numbers production-wise? We'll find out. But do I think Toronto now with Santander, and I don't mean this in a bad way, do I think that this changes my opinion of where Toronto is in the division? No, I don't. I still sat with the fact I thought it would have been great for him in Houston, and I think Houston's game would have been elevated. It's a good pairing with Bo Bichette, Vlad Guerrero Jr., and Santander. But I still am not a team where I'm sitting there going, damn, the Blue Jays now, to me, are moving up the AL East ranks. I'm not ready to say that yet. So that's all I have to say about that, guys. That's all I got.
Well, all right.
Yeah, I don't think the Blue Jays are like I said before, I am so confused by everything the Blue Jays are doing, because they sign Santander. They've been on every single person possible. They probably have tried to sign me. I just wasn't aware of it. But then at the same time, they're also like, if you give us enough for Vlad, he's yours. And it's like, okay, are we competing here? Are they playing this long-term game, but is part of the long-term game getting rid of Vlad, and now you're kind of having Tony for another rebuild that he has to go through? That's one of those, awesome for Tony, well-deserved over those 5 years, every single penny he earned, but not the best stability. I think in Toronto at the moment, I think at any second, as I said before, they will blow it all up. They have no issue of, hey, we got a good offer for Vlad. We're taking it. And now we're seeing what we can get for Bo. And we're going to see if we can do kind of a quick retool, more of a rebuild.
Yeah, they're in no man's land. Yeah. That's what they've been in. They were expected literally in 2023. A lot of people, even myself, I thought the Blue Jays were going to win that division. My prediction at the time was the Yankees and Red Sox would miss the playoffs, and the Orioles and the Blue Jays would make the playoffs. The Blue Jays win the division. Turned out that the Orioles won the division, and the Blue Jays just stunk, right? So, they have a roster of talented hitters with Bo and Vlad Guerrero Jr., but a team that hasn't put it together, and now they're in this twilight, and you got to make a choice. Do you look ahead and try to set your team up for the future, or are you going to continue to try to make something happen? But to make something happen, you haven't made enough pieces or shown in the previous years that they can do it, right? It'd be one thing last year if the Blue Jays, like, oh, we had a ton of guys getting injured and it just didn't work out. Like for Orioles fans, I know there's skepticism about need to do more. The Baltimore Orioles made the playoffs the last 2 years. You know, like, and a lot of those guys are still back, right? So at least with the moves in the offseason, you go, well, they still got a lot of guys. So I feel good that the Orioles, and again, Kev, you said it, and that's been my motto. You go as much as your young core. You see that. Toronto hasn't done anything the last 2 years that gives you that feeling of, yep, we're doing it. We're doing it, and we're gonna show everyone that we're taking that next step. They've struck out, and I hate the pun right off the bat. They struck out on all deals. D-. But they did. So we will see what happens. Best of luck to Tony. O's fans will always love him. They'll see him here in Baltimore when he faces off against the Birds. And no doubt in my mind, they're going to give him a standing O and an ovation and show him how much they appreciated his time in helping rebuild a Baltimore Orioles team to being back into contention and back into just being a part of being one of those teams again that Baltimore is very proud of.